a chant, and this is from the Gita Mahatmyam, and those of you who know it can chant along with me. Om Parthaya Pratibodhitam Bhagavatam Narayanena Swayam Vyasena Gratitam Puranam Ye Mahabharatam Advaitam
Bhagavatim Ashtadashayainim Ambattami Bhagavad Gita
Vasudeva Sutan Devam Samsachanuramardanam
Devaki Paramanandam
Krishnam
Krishnam Vande Jagadgurum
Mukam Karoti Vachalam Om Langhayate Girim Yatripatamaham
Vande Paramanandam Madhamam.
So let me read a translation of that. O Mother Bhagavad Gita, I meditate on you who were made known to Partha by the Lord Narayana himself. You, O Bhagavad Gita, who were included in the Mahabharata by the ancient sage Vyasa. You, the goddess, who rains down the nectar of Advaita in 18 chapters, the destroyer of relative existence. I worship Krishna, world teacher, the son of Vasudeva, the delight supreme of Devaki, and the slayer of the demons Kamsa and Chanura. I adore that supremely blissful Madhava, by whose grace the mute are made eloquent and the lame are made to cross over mountains. Om Shanti, Shanti.
Shanti, Shanti.
So again, welcome to our Bhagavad Gita class. And as I said a minute ago, I will begin with chapter 1, and chapter 2, chapter 2, which is Sankhya Yogo Nama Dvitiyo Dhyaya, the second chapter known as the Yoga of Sankhya. And in the Gita, Sankhya refers not to the Sankhya philosophy as a darshana, as laid out in the Sankhya Sutras and Sankhya Karika, but it refers to the path of knowledge, Jnana Yoga, because Sankhya was, in a sense, the basis of Jnana Yoga, though Advaita went to an ultimate unity, which Sankhya philosophy did not go. Probably in the time of the Vedas, there was not the distinction between darshanas that there is now. And so there was more an exchange of thought, and we can't be sure now, but there's evidence from the Upanishads, from the Gita, from the Mahabharata, such texts, that the thought of Kapila, the founder of Sankhya Darshana, was closer to Vedanta than it became later, when the schools of philosophy were formalized and drawn up into different schools that were separated from each other. So Sankhya in the Gita refers to the path of knowledge, Jnana Yoga. So we begin with the first verse. Sanjaya Vacha Tam tatha kripaya vishtam ashrupurna kulekshanam vishinandamidam vakyam uvacha madhusudana. So it begins Sanjaya Uvacha, Sanjaya said. So remember that the whole Gita is being narrated by Sanjaya. He is telling the blind king Dhritarashtra what happened, because at the beginning of the Gita, the first verse of the first chapter, Dhritarashtra asks Sanjaya, who is by his side, he says, Dharma kshetre kurukshetre samaveta yuyutsavaha mamaka pandavaschaiva kima kurvata Sanjaya. O Sanjaya, on the battlefield of Kurukshetra, which is the field of Dharma, my sons and the sons of King Pandu, they have come together to fight with the desire to fight. Tell me what happened. So then the rest of the Gita is Sanjaya's narration to Dhritarashtra about that which he sees. Sanjaya had clairvoyance, and so he tells them what happened on the battle of Kurukshetra. So in the first verse of chapter 2, again, it begins Sanjaya Vacha. In this first chapter, Arjuna had asked Sri Krishna to take him out onto the battlefield so that he could see those who were gathered to fight him. So Sri Krishna takes him out into the middle of the battlefield and says, here, see those who are ready to fight. And then when Arjuna looks out, until this time, Arjuna had been full of confidence, ready to fight. His whole life had prepared him for this fight. And he looks out and sees his kinsmen. He sees his gurus, Dronacharya and Bhishma, his relatives. And he realizes that these are the people that I am going to fight to the death. These are the people I have to kill. And his courage fails him. He realizes that, no, I can't do this. So as I said, when we went over the first chapter in Austin, we have to read the Gita from the standpoint of Arjuna and see that his plight is really our plight. That if we were in his position, it would be hard not to feel the same that he was feeling. Now we all have studied the Gita at some point, or we've heard about the Gita enough so that we know the basic story. And some of you, of course, have read it very well and know it very well. Others at least know the basic story. And so we know how it all comes out, and we know how Sri Krishna scolds Arjuna and tells him that that he is wrong to be weak-hearted like that. And so knowing the outcome, we also tend to identify with the scolder rather than the scolded. We identify with Sri Krishna rather than Arjuna. But Sri Krishna is giving us the Gita, not just to Arjuna. If it were just a talk that Sri Krishna had to Arjuna for personal reasons that Arjuna needed, why would people still be studying it thousands of years later? It's because Sri Krishna is speaking to us in the form of Arjuna. And so when we see the plight of Arjuna, we can understand that it was very natural for him to come undone. Think that if you were suddenly on the battlefield and that it was as if you were having to fight your own guru, whether that's Swami Swahananda or some other Swami, and other people that you revere very highly, as well as close relatives. They are the people that you're going into battle with. They're the ones that you have to kill. And so it's not at all unreasonable that Arjuna came undone, and he gives arguments that are true, arguments that are good. They're not foolish arguments. And so then that's the situation. At the end of chapter 1, Arjuna has collapsed in the chariot and says, I won't fight. So then we begin chapter 2, Sanjaya Uvacha. Sanjaya says, Tam tatha kripaya vishtam ashrupurna kulekshanam vishidantam idam vakyam uvacha Madhusudana. So he says that now Madhusudana, Krishna, says to him, to Arjuna, who had been filled with pity, tam tatha kripaya vishtam, he who had been overcome with pity, with compassion. As we'll see, it was compassion, but it was compassion based on moha, on delusion. So to him who was filled with compassion, whose eyes were filled with tears, ashrupurna kulekshanam, his eyes were filled with tears. Vishidantam, and he who had collapsed in distress, idam vakyam uvacha Madhusudana. This was said by Sri Krishna. So this is just introducing the continuation of the story where Arjuna had collapsed in the chariot and said, I want no yotsya, I won't fight. And so then Sanjaya says that Sri Krishna speaks. So the next two verses I'll do together because they go together. So it says, Shri Bhagavan Uvacha, Kutastva Kashmalamidam Vishame Samupastitam Anarya Jushtama Swargyam Akirti Karamarjuna Klaibyam Masma Gama Partha Naitatva Yupapadyate Kshudram Hridaya Daurbalyam Tyaktotishta Parantapa. So here he's Sri Bhagavan Uvacha, the Blessed Lord said in response to Arjuna's statement that I won't fight. And the fact that he had collapsed in distress, put down his bow, collapsed in the chariot, and eyes were filled with tears, heart palpitating, and said, no, I can't do this. So kutastva kashmalamidam vishame samupastitam. So, O Arjuna, in this perilous place, here in the middle of this battlefield, whence has come upon you this small-heartedness, this impurity entertained by unenlightened persons, the small-heartedness, which does not lead to heaven and which brings infamy? So here, Sri Krishna is challenging Arjuna. Where has this faint-heartedness, kshudram, hridaya daurbalyam, weakness of heart, the smallness, kshudram, this smallness of mind, this hridaya daurbalyam, this weakness of heart, anarya jushtam, aswargyam, that which is contrary to the attainment of swarga, so to the attainment of heaven, and which is anarya jushtam. It's not worthy of an arya, not worthy of a noble person like you, O Arjuna, you who have been trained to do your duty all of your life, and you who never shrank from any duty, never shrank from any foe. How could this happen to you? So he begins verse 2, his statement with a challenge to Arjuna, and then verse 3, Klaibyam mas magama partha. Don't fall into this state of being like a nabumsak, like being neutered. Don't fall into this unmanliness, O Arjuna, O Partha. Naitatva yupapadyate. This doesn't befit you. You are such a hero. How could this happen to you, a hero like you? The idea is that now he's insulting Arjuna's manhood, insulting his character, and doing this with the purpose of waking up a sense of shame within him. He sees that part of the problem, not the central problem, but part of the problem is that Arjuna, in seeing his relatives, he's lost his courage, and now he's behaving in a way that is very unbefitting a person like him, a person of self-control. So a person who has deep self-control, they're able to face any situation. Even if they had faced the situation of Arjuna, if a person who was a master of self-control, and even if they thought that I should not fight, they wouldn't give way to such unmanliness as Arjuna, collapsing in the chariot, throwing away his bow and arrow, eyes filling with tears. So Sri Krishna begins by insulting his manhood, insulting his nobility, insulting his sense of dharma. Kshudram, this smallness that you are displaying, this hridaya daurabalyam, this weakness, this faint-heartedness, weakness of heart. Tyaktotishta parantapa. Give it up and stand up, O Parantapa. Now, one of the things that Madhusudana, whose commentary I have in front of me, Madhusudana Acharya, one of the great commentators and one of the later commentators on the Gita, long after the time of Shankaracharya, but following Shankara's tradition, one of the specialties of his commentary is that he always explains why Sri Krishna or Arjuna uses the epithet for the other that they use. That is, there are many names that are used for Krishna, many names used for Arjuna. So Madhusudana always finds a reason why a particular name was used in a particular verse. So in verse number 2, Sri Krishna addresses Arjuna as Partha, that is the son of Pritha. And so that indicates that he's calling him like a mama's boy. Now, Partha is a name that was used in other contexts where it had no such sense. But of all of the names that he had to choose for Arjuna, he called him, son of Pritha. Perhaps to indicate that he's acting like a mama's boy, or perhaps to indicate that you are from such a noble lady. Why are you acting like this? To remind him of his heritage. So one or the other reason. And in this verse 3, Sri Krishna addresses Arjuna as Parantapa, he who is a scorcher of foes. And that's to call up his heroic powers, that you who are Parantapa, you who are the scorcher of your foes, how could you be collapsing in the chariot, sitting there, throwing away your weapons in the middle of the battlefield, when everything is beginning to start, when all of these armies are collected here to fight for you, and this is your condition. So you who are Parantapa, you who are the scorcher of your foes, Takto Uttishta Parantapa. Stand up, O Parantapa. Then after that, Arjuna again speaks. And so we come to verse 4, which says, Arjuna vacha katham bhishma maham sankhye dronang ja madhusudana ishubhih pratiyotsyami pujarha varisudana. So this says that Katham Bhishma Maham Sankhye Dronang Cha Madhusudana, O Madhusudana. And he addresses Madhusudana as Madhusudana, the slayer of the demon Madhu, recognizing the heroic quality of Sri Krishna and the martial qualities of Sri Krishna. So how can I in battle fight with Drona and Bhishma? Katham Bhishma Maham Sankhye. How can I in battle face Bhishma and Drona? These are my teachers, the ones that I make pranam to. In India, of course, as you know, that the respect for the teacher is very, very great. Even now, even with the great changes taking place in Indian society with the industrialization and the late period industrialization and the commercialization of society, the westernizing, continuing westernizing influences on society, even so, there's still great respect for the teacher in India. So again, for Arjuna, it's not like, as you know, it's not like in the West where a teacher is somebody who's hired to do a job, and you may appreciate, you should appreciate what they do, but it's not a position of high respect. No, in India, a teacher is highly respected. Be the teacher a teacher of martial arts, a teacher of mathematics, a teacher of astrology, a teacher of literature, a teacher of music, or a teacher of spirituality. And so Drona and Bhishma had taught Arjuna the martial arts. But along with that, they also conveyed wisdom, because in India, every science and every art was in one way or another connected with the ultimate truth. And the first teachers in every lineage of teachers, whether it's astrology or whether it's mathematics, ancient mathematics, or whether it's poetry or whether it's music or whether it's grammar, etc., there's a rishi who was the founder of this lineage of teachers. And so every inquiry goes back to a rishi, a great sage, who first revealed, a great sage or a deity, devata, who first revealed the knowledge which has been passed down and amplified over the ages. So again, Arjuna, seeing Drona and Bhishma, says, how can I fight them in battle? Ishubi, with arrows. Pratiyotsyami, how will I fight against them with arrows? Pujarha varisudana, those who are worthy of worship. And then he addresses Sri Krishna as Arisudana, the destroyer of your foes, the destroyer of the enemy. So, O Madhusudana, O destroyer of enemies, Arisudana, how shall I fight with arrows in battle against Bhishma and Drona, who are worthy of adoration? One of our American swamis who lives now, he's in Southern California, he had never been to India before he went to take his sannyasa. And so 6 months before his sannyasa, he arrived in India because he had been asked to teach physics at the Vivekananda University outside of Belur Mutt, because he has a PhD in physics. And so he went, and when he went to the first class he was to give at the university, he walked into the classroom, of course, dressed in his ochre robes, and all of the students stood up. And he was shocked. He thought something was wrong. Again, he had never been to India. And the idea of being a physics teacher and walking into a university class and having all of the students stand up and face him, that was it floored him. And so he later asked what was going on, and it was explained to him that that's the respect for the teacher. So Arjuna is faced with fighting these people. So he asks, how can I do it? Then verse 5, he says, Guru nahatva himohanu bhavan shreyo bhoktum bhaikshyamapi haloke hatvartha kamans tu guru nihaiva bhunjiya bhogan rudhira pradigdhan. So that is, Guru nahatva himohanu bhavan shreyo bhoktum bhaikshyamapi haloke. Rather than killing these gurus who are very noble-minded and respectable, it's better to live in this world, ihaloke, in this world on bhiksha, to live on alms. By killing even the respected elders, he goes on, we shall only be enjoying here the pleasures of wealth and desirable things drenched in blood. So Rudhira Pradigdhan, Bhunjiya Bhogan, we should be enjoying desirable things, Rudhira Pradigdhan, which are stained with blood. That is, if we win, if by killing our gurus, these respected elders and great teachers, if we win the battle by having killed these people, then whatever we enjoy, so yes, so if we win, we get enjoyments, but everything that we enjoy will be stained with the blood of our gurus. So it's a very powerful image that he's giving here, a wonderful image and a powerful image. So the running translation is, rather than killing the respected elders who are verily noble-minded, it is better in this world to live even on alms. Now, quibble with the translator here, because the word used is guru, not just respected elders, but guru. So rather than killing the respected teachers, gurus, who are verily noble-minded, it is better in this world to live even on alms. By killing even the respectable elders or the great teachers, we shall only be enjoying here the pleasures of wealth and desirable things drenched in blood. So again, his argument is cogent. That's not a foolish argument. That's a cogent argument. Again, think if you were in a situation, of course it's hard to think of an actual situation, so you have to stretch your imagination. But think, if you're suddenly faced on the battlefield with your own guru and other respected people, people that you love, people that you respect, people at whose feet you have sat and learned various things. You're suddenly faced on the battlefield and you're going to have to kill them in order to win that which you want. Because what the Pandavas were struggling for was to regain their kingdom, which Duryodhana and his brothers had taken away unrightfully. And so they were trying to get back something which was rightly theirs, but it was a piece of property. They wanted their kingdom back. There was a piece of property and the right to rule. And they didn't even ask for much. They just asked for 5 villages for the 5 brothers. And even that Duryodhana wouldn't give. And so they were asking for something rightfully, but it was something that was physical and social, land and the right to rule. And so in the face of that, Arjuna sees that we're going to kill these people. Then how could I ever enjoy winning after this? I couldn't. So then in verse 6, he continues, Na chaitad vidma kataranno gariyo yadva jayema yadivano jayeyuhu yane vahatva navidjiji vishamasteva sthita pramukhe dhartarashtraha. So this says, we do not know this as well as to which is the better for us, whether we shall win or whether they shall conquer us. I don't know now, Krishna, which is better, that we win or that we be conquered. I don't know which is better. Maybe it's better that we are conquered and then let them have what they want. Those very followers of Dhritarashtra, by killing whom we do not wish to live, stand in confrontation with us. So the very people we are to kill are people whose death would cause us not to want to live. So just as we feel if our mother, our father, our spouse, our child passes away, and we feel that I don't want to live anymore. How can I live now that they are gone? So he's saying that by killing these people, that's the way I will feel. That's the way we will feel. That by killing these people, we won't even want to live. So why should we want to win? Maybe it's better that we lose. I don't know which is of the two is better. Yadva jayema yariwa no jayeyu. Whether that we should win or whether they should defeat us. I don't know which is better. Yaneva hatva na jivishama. Those by whom killing we wouldn't even want to live, they are standing in front of us in confrontation on the battlefield. So again, see the plight of Arjuna. It's a real plight. It's not something that we can just say, oh, Arjuna was being silly and he didn't know the truth, and so Sri Krishna had to come and hit him over the head and make him understand that no, he was being foolish. No, he's not being foolish. He's being the way that we would be in a similar situation. And his arguments that he gives in the previous chapter and now in these verses that we're doing now, his arguments are cogent. So verse 7, he continues, Karpanya dosho pahata swabhava prichami tvam dharma samudha chetaha yachreyasyan distidam bruhitan me shishyasteham shadhimam tvam prabandham. So this is a beautiful verse. Because up until now, he's been arguing with Sri Krishna with a sense of certitude. Of course, he says that he's confused, and he says, I don't know which is better, that we win or that we lose. But the sense of the argument is that actually, I think it's better that we lose. That's the sense of his argument. Though he says, I don't know which is better, the inner meaning of that is that I think that losing is better than winning. And so therefore I throw away my bow and arrow, therefore I collapse in the chariot, therefore I say, Nayotsye, I won't fight. But here in verse 7, he begins to open himself to self-doubt and realize how confused he is and that he needs help. So karpanya dosho pahata swabhava prichami tvam dharma samudha chetaha. I who am confused about what is the right thing to do, what is dharma? Dharma samudha cheta. My mind is deluded about the right dharma. I who am deluded about dharma and who karpanya dosho pahata swabhava, and whose nature, which is normally that of a warrior, has been overcome by my feelings, by my emotionality, my karpanya. Then yachreyasya nistityam bruhitan me. That which is best, you tell me that, O Krishna. Whatever is best, that I fight, that I give up the fight, that we try to win, or that we allow them to defeat us. What is better, you please tell me, because now I realize I'm confused. I don't know. And so this is a very important moment in the Gita, because it indicates that Arjuna has come to a place of surrender. And then he says in the last line of verse 7, Shishyasteham shadhimam dvam prabannam. Shishyasteham, I am your disciple. I am your disciple. Shadhimam dvam prabannam. Teach me who am surrendered at your feet, prabannam. please instruct me. Shadhimam Twam Prapannam. Shadhimam Twam Prapannam. Please instruct me who am surrendered at your feet, O Sri Krishna. So the running translation is, with my nature overpowered by the defect due to an enlightenment, with a mind bewildered about duty, I ask you, tell me that which is the absolute and everlasting highest goal. I am your disciple. Instruct me who have taken refuge in you. So again, now he is ready for instruction, and that's an extremely important moment in spiritual life. When we first take an interest in spiritual life, some of us come to spiritual life knowing too much, meaning that we think we know too much. And we have the answers and basically want somebody just to confirm our preconceived answers. But no, the great moment comes in spiritual life when we realize that there is someone who knows more than I do and that I can learn from them. And so let me open myself to them and let me open myself to learning. And so that being allowed to open ourselves to learning, to instruction, that's a very important point in spiritual life. It's harder to reach than we think because all of us are full of ourselves and full of our opinions and full of our own certainty. Now, that doesn't mean that you should surrender to anyone, and anyone who says, I'm a teacher, that you should surrender. No. In spiritual life, much of spiritual life is learning what to open myself to and what to close myself to. There are people, influences, places, ideas that we should close ourselves to because they are harmful. But we should learn to open ourselves to that which is beneficial. So in the beginning of spiritual life, we have to work hard to find that which is beneficial and that which is harmful, and to gradually learn that by sticking to the beneficial and by avoiding the harmful, I'm doing myself good. So the reason for sticking to the beneficial and avoiding the harmful is not because the scriptures want me to do that, not because God said do that, not because the Dharma Shastra and Manusmriti, etc. said that, but it's because it's good for me. When we understand that, then we've made a great step in spiritual life, and then we're able to open ourselves to higher influences. So that's where Arjuna has come here. So in verse 8, he continues, Nahi prapashyami mamapanudyadyat shokamutshoshanamindriyanam avapya bhuma vasapatnam riddham rajyam suranam apichadhipatyam. So nahi prapashyami mamapanudyadyat shokamutshoshanamindriyanam. And I don't see that which is going to relieve the intense misery which is burning my insides. I'm being burnt, scorched by this misery that I feel here in this confusing situation on the battlefield, not knowing what to do. I'm being scorched by it and I don't know what to do. So because I do not see that which can, even after acquiring on earth a prosperous kingdom, free from enemies and even sovereignty over the gods, remove my sorrow, blasting the senses. So that's a long, complicated sentence. But it begins, the verse begins by, I don't see that which will remove this misery, which is burning my insides. Which is burning my senses and my being. Avapya bhuma vasapatnam riddham, even attaining to vast land, ruling over the whole earth, and great wealth, asapatnam riddham, and great wealth, rajyam suranam apichadhipatyam, and even attaining to sovereignty over the gods, suranam rajyam, sovereignty even over the gods. Still, I don't know, that wouldn't remove the misery that I'm feeling. Even if I attain to that, if I attain, after acquiring the whole earth as mine, and having attained a prosperous kingdom free from enemies, and even sovereignty over the gods, Suranam Chadhipatyam. I still don't know what would remove this burning of burning in my senses. So again, he finds his situation hopeless. And so therefore, he has asked Arjuna to help him. So the first chapter is known as Vishada Yoga, the yoga of sadness. The sadness, the depression of Arjuna is called a yoga, a means for the attainment of higher truth. So why is it called a yoga? Because it's the sorrow of Arjuna, the suffering of Arjuna, which opens him to receive higher teaching from Sri Krishna. Before this, he was good friends with Sri Krishna. He respected Sri Krishna as an elder, and he respected his wisdom also. But that was about as far as it went. He didn't really know who Sri Krishna was, and he didn't feel the need to know. But now he's in an intense situation where he doesn't know what to do, and he has to turn to someone for help. And so he turns to Sri Krishna. So now in verse 9 and 10, Sanjaya, the commentator, he again speaks before Sri Krishna begins his instruction. So verse 9 says, Sanjaya vacha eva muktva rishikesham gudakesha parantapaha nayotsya iti govindam muktva tushnim babhuvaha. So eva muktva rishikesham, having spoken thus to Krishna, Rishikesha, Sri Krishna, Gudakesha, that is the destroyer of sleep, who is Arjuna, and who is Parantapa, the slayer of his enemies. The Yotsya iti Govindam uktva tushnim babhuvaha, said to Govinda, na Yotsye, I won't fight. Uktva tushnim babhuvaha, having said that, he became quiet. So again, Sanjaya says that having spoken thus to Hrishikesha, to Sri Krishna, then Arjuna says, I won't fight, and becomes quiet. Here also, Hrishikesham is the word used for, epithet used for Sri Krishna. So he who brings horripilations, he who brings awakening to others. Sanjaya is saying that calling Sri Krishna Hrishikesha, recognizing his power to remove the delusion and the sorrow of Arjuna. And he calls Arjuna Gudakesha, the one who has conquered sleep. Because Arjuna is called that, that was one of his natural epithets, the one who has conquered sleep, because Arjuna had control over sleep. He could stay awake as long as he needed to accomplish that which he needed to do. And so he had great control over the over sleep and the wish to sleep. And so here Sanjaya calls him Gudakesha to show that Arjuna is naturally one who is not subject to delusion. And so to show the contrast between Arjuna's noble nature and his show of weakness now. And then he also calls him Parantapa, the destroyer of enemies, again to show the contrast. He who is the destroyer of the demon of sleep, and he who is the destroyer of enemies, this Arjuna, who now is overcome with weakness, says, Na yotsye, I won't fight, and tushnim babhuvaha, and then became silent. And then in verse 10, Sanjaya continues, Tamuvacha Hrishikesha prahasanniva bharata senayor ubhayor madhye vishidantamidam vachaha. So Tamuvacha Hrishikesha, so to him, to Arjuna, Hrishikesha spoke prahasanniva bharata. O Bharata, that is, O King Bharata, that is an epithet for Dhritarashtra in the Bharata line. So O Bharata, descendant of Bharata, Rishikesha now spoke to Arjuna prahasanniva, as though laughing or as though smiling. So here in this terrible situation on a battlefield which is about to be covered in blood, with death and destruction, and Arjuna is completely undone, weeping and collapsed in his chariot. He who is supposed to be leading the Pandavas, the armies, is collapsed in misery. Now Sri Krishna is smiling, prahasanniva, as though he is smiling, enjoying the whole thing. So this shows again Sri Krishna's both his enlightened state and his divine state. That he's an enlightened being, but not just enlightened, he's also divine, and he knows the past and the future of everything. Sri Ramakrishna used to say that when he looked at a person, he could see them like a glass case, and he would see everything within them. He would see their past, he would see their future, the path of their development, etc. And so he was able to give instruction just as everyone needed. And so Sri Krishna, like that with the whole world, can see the past and the future and knows that which is going to happen on the battlefield. And so he knows the true state of Arjuna, that this is actually weakness. And so he who has no worries in the world, because he knows the divine outcome of everything, he smiles as he speaks to Arjuna to show that this is just foolishness. This is nothing but moha. And I, Sri Krishna, enjoy it because I am free from moha. As we, someday, when we are able to see all of this as play, we can enjoy everything. Now we find everything disturbs us so much. We read the news and we get too much news, and that's disturbing. Too much about the pandemic, too much about the political situation in this country, too much about the problems in India, too much about problems in other parts of the world, and we get disturbed by everything. But when we're able to come to the point where we actually see that the whole universe is nothing but play, the play of God, then nothing will disturb us. As Swami Vivekananda said, that just as when we see two puppies playing and play fighting, and one of them gives a nip to the ear of the other and the other runs off yelping, we don't take it seriously because we know it's just the playing of puppies. And so from the standpoint of the enlightened one, we see this whole world is just like the play of puppies. All of the tragedies and things that seem so important to us and so terrible to us, we see them, no, it's all just a play, just an appearance. That doesn't mean we become heartless and we laugh at the sufferings of others. No, it means that we're able to see everything in a divine perspective and nothing troubles us, nothing bothers us. We actually become more compassionate towards those who are suffering because we see how needless their suffering is. We see how real they take it and how needless it is. And so we become more compassionate. But we don't take it seriously. We don't internalize it and take it seriously. So, O descendant of Bharata, to him who is sorrowing between the two armies, Sena Yoru Bhayor Madhye, between the two armies, Rishikesha, mocking as it were, said these words, or smiling as it actually says, said these words. So now we've come to verse 11. I want to save that for next time, where Sri Krishna begins to speak, because that is where Shankaracharya begins his commentary. In this commentary of Madhusudana Saraswati, he begins from the first verse of the first chapter. So he comments on every verse in the Gita. But Shankaracharya starts with verse 11 because there is where Sri Krishna begins his teaching. And so the rest Shankaracharya takes as story, as it is. And so that we're coming to the beginning of the most important part of the Gita. But again, it's important for us to know the context. And so chapters 1 and chapter 2 up to through verse 10, that gives the context for the teaching and allows us to see what it is that is going to be, what it is that Sri Krishna is responding to. So it gives meaning to the rest of the Gita. So now let me see if there are any questions. And I don't know, is there anyone who is technically taking care of things so that if someone raises a question, or shall we just, oh, okay, Shonak, you're taking care of that. Okay, good. So there should be a way for people to raise hands if they or show that they want to ask a question, right, Shonak?
Yeah, so I'm going to unmute them and I mean, we can ask them probably to go one by one if they have anything to talk about, I mean, so that way we can. So anybody wants to, what do you call, raise their first question if they have, or
Yes, can I
yes,
ask?
sure, go ahead.
Yes, yes.
Hi. Namaskar, Maharaj. It was a wonderful discourse. I never heard you before. So this is the first time. It was a totally different perspective. But I have few questions, You
Yes.
are holding the book by Madhusudan Saraswati.
Yes.
I heard very little about him. He is after Shankaracharya, right?
Yes, yes, several
He-
centuries after
Several
Shankaracharya.
centuries after Shankaracharya, right? Okay, but he is considered one of the most knowledgeable, uh, if not like Shankaracharya, but very very knowledgeable person, right?
Yes, he was a great scholar. And let me just, before you go on with the question or other questions, let me just say a little bit about him because he started out as a Vaishnava.
Yeah,
And then but he was very learned, very intelligent. And so he studied Nyaya and he
yeah,
became very proficient in Nyaya, like Sri Chaitanya did also.
right.
And then he wanted to learn Advaita Vedanta in order to defeat the Advaita Vedantists from the standpoint of Vaishnavism, from a dualistic standpoint. So he went to Benares to study Advaita, and there he became convinced of the truth of Advaita. So then he became an Advaitin, a follower of the lineage of
Mm,
Shankaracharya,
mm,
and then wrote this commentary and wrote other books as well, great books. But yes, he was extremely learned. He was highly spiritual.
mm,
And one of the great things about him was that even after his conversion to Advaita, he
mm.
retained a deep devotion to Sri Krishna, personal bhakti for
Oh,
Sri Krishna also. So
oh,
go ahead,
thank
Partha.
thank you. And the last one, I don't want to take too much time. The second chapter, third sloka.
Yes,
uh, Klaibam Mashmod Amapartha Naitattai Upapaddate
yes,
Khudrang Hridaya Durbollang Tattu Tishta Parantapa. Now, I have read about this particular sloka. It seems to Vivekananda, Swamiji, this was one of the most remarkable slokas, it seems, The use of the word and the klaibam, it is like giving somebody electric shock, It is
yes,
like it is like kind of whipping, someone.
yes,
I mean, in that sense, because the word klaibam is very, very, and to a person who is the commander in chief, like in that particular war, So can you talk a little bit
yes,
about
yes. I'm
this?
glad you brought that up because I always mention that, and I forgot to mention it today. In fact, I remember talking about that in Austin when I first went through these verses. So yes, Swami Vivekananda used to say that verses 2 and 3 of chapter 2
Mm,
are the heart of the Gita. Now, by that, he didn't mean that they are the highest spiritual teaching,
mm, mm,
but he meant that they set the tone for the whole instruction of the Gita. That this is the call of Sri Krishna that you have become weak.
right,
Stand up and fight. Don't give way to this unmanliness, this klaibyam, the
yeah,
state
yeah,
of being neutered, the state of being
right,
unmanly.
right.
You're a great warrior. It's anarya jushtam. It's unworthy of an arya.
Anariya Jushtam.
Yes, he is whipping him with his words. He's giving him insults, but insults which have the effect of awakening a sense of manliness, of
Right.
awakening a
Right.
sense
Of course.
yes, I have something to do.
Right.
And so that's why Swamiji says that this is the heart of Sri Krishna's message. Yes, he teaches about Atman, he teaches about Brahman, he teaches that you have no death, he teaches about devotion, he teaches about meditation. All of these great spiritual teachings come later in the Gita, but it's founded on this idea of strength. Swamiji said that this is the one word from the Upanishads that resounds continually to me, that abhi, abhi,
Abhi,
be fearless, be fearless.
fearless.
He said that the one word from the Upanishads that I like is the command for strength, be strong.
Mm.
And in his California lectures, Swamiji, again and again, especially in Northern California, his lectures in 1900, there he says, this is my one message to the world, be strong, be strong.
Right.
Stand up and face the misery that's going to come. Don't fall in the face of it. Stand up and face the difficulties that are to come.
Mm.
And so Swamiji said that that was the essence of his message, and that was the essence of Sri Krishna's message. Yes, the other things about realization, about the manifestation of the self, realization of Brahman, of God, of the avatar, etc. Those are the great spiritual teachings. But unless we have this spirit of strength, the other things we won't be able to do much with.
Sure. And thank you so much.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Any other question?
Shona, I have a question. Maharaj,
Yes,
Sure, go ahead.
Before they started going to the battle, about to depart for the battle,
yes,
Arjuna and Sri Krishna, Kunti comes there and tells Sri Krishna, Krishna, my son is innocent. I assign him to your care, protect him. At that time, Arjuna is thinking within himself, what, I am innocent? I am almost equal in knowledge, wisdom to Sri Krishna. He is thinking within himself. Why is my mother saying I am innocent? That's the thought he had.
yes.
When he went to the battlefield, Maharaj described his situation facing all the soldiers across the aisle and getting completely confused, irrelevantly quoting the scriptures, and then explaining compassionate things, and finally broke down and then subject himself as the disciple of Sri Krishna. Tell me, I am helpless. What do I do? It is at that time he realizes how correct is my mother when she said innocent. Then Sri Krishna addresses him at that time, son of Kunti, which is that the way the address should be viewed as? That
Yes.
you are thinking, yeah, son of Kunti.
Yes, 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 yes. So that yes, that is the way that Sri Krishna is showing him that yes, that is true. That and that now you need to gain wisdom. Yes.
And Maharaj, one more thing, just a clarification. I don't know much. Maharaj has to clarify, explain to me. Madhusudana Saraswati is following the legacy of Sankaracharya.
Yes.
And he has written about 23 volumes of books in Sanskrit. And he's an Advaita Vedanti.
Yes.
And it is said, I read somewhere later on, Maharaj also mentioned, but he's a bhakta of Sri Krishna.
Yes. Yes.
And is it true that later on he became a Dvaita, from Advaita to Dvaita, and then completely became a bhakta of Sri Krishna?
No, the opposite is true. He went from the Dvaita Bhakti, he went from that to Advaita. he became an Advaitin. He started out as a Vaishnava and went from that to an Advaitin. But he always retained his devotion for Sri Krishna, but he never left Advaita. That was the bedrock. And his books like Advaita Siddhi, all of his books are for the establishing of the supremacy of Advaita. So no, that he never left. But he also never gave up devotion as well.
Thanks, Maharaj. Maharaj, shall we announce to everybody or just remind everyone on Saturday of every week at 10 a.m., Maharaj will take the class so that people should know it's a weekly basis.
Yes, yes. So weekly I'll be here and hope to see you all next week.
Yes.
Okay, so glad to see you. And
Thank you, Maharaj.
let me end with a chant. And this is from this is one I haven't yet memorized, but this is the 9th chapter of the Gita, 9th verse of the Gita Dhyanam.
Yeah.
Oh.
Om Yam Brahma Varunendra Rudra Marutastun Vanti Divyaistavaihi Vedai Sangha Kramo Gayanti Yam Samagaha Dhyanavastita Tadgatena Manasa Pashyanti Yam Yogino Yasyantam Navidu Sura Suragana Devaya Tasmai Namaha. We bow to that Supreme Being, whom Brahma and other gods praise with divine hymns, whose glories the singers of the Sama hymns sing through the Vedas and Upanishads, whom the yogis see with their mind absorbed in that through meditation, and whose end or beginning neither the gods nor demigods know. Om Shanti 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 Hari Om Tat Sat.
That's the
Om, peace, peace, peace be unto us all. So, namaskar, bye bye.